Hey everybody, welcome back to Hard Forking. This episode is actually all about hard forking. Coming up on the 4th of February, we've got the Genesis protocol change at the BSV camp. So in this episode, we're going to have a chat, let you know what that's all about. We actually caught up with the key person involved in this, a guy by the name of Steve Shadders. So here's a quick look at that interview from a few months back.
So somebody that's sort of looking in on this space now, how would you describe the major difference between Bitcoin as most people know it and what's happening at BSV? Obviously, you know, my understanding of what I'm trying to get across to people is that you guys are removing the cap on the block size. So in short, for someone that isn't technical, what does that actually mean?
Look, if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say utility. Bitcoin SV is actually useful because of scale. And it's useful in any number of ways, and we don't even know what all those ways are just now. The ability to store data on the blockchain in a structured way is an area that we're really just starting to explore and see the potential of right now. But of course, payments, being able to transact quickly, safely, and in the kind of volumes that are required to run a global economy, it just isn't possible on blockchains that are constrained.
Right. So you're not just digital gold would be kind of one of the things to say.
No. Well, I mean, this whole notion of store of value is. If you're going to rely on something as a store of value, you need to be able to explain where that value comes from. And if the value is just because a bunch of people believe it, then I don't know. For me, it doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence. If the value is underpinned by utility, on the other hand, then that's a different story.
So you got what is a hard fork effectively. You got one more big one coming up, is that right? And then
there'll probably be
a cap.
Yes, there'll be no cap. It may not be the last protocol modification because there's a couple of things left over to sort of undo. So we're not quite sure exactly when that one would happen. Maybe November of last year, but after February there'll be no cap. It'll be regulated by the miners to some extent.
So look, if you haven't checked it out yet, please look at the Real Crypto show that we've just launched. The series is designed to help bring new people into the space. We've copped a lot of flack from the different communities because we're not talking just about their project. Get over that, people. This is designed for educational purposes to help people really understand what's happening in the different projects and make their own mind up about any decisions they make about a particular blockchain. We hope you understand that and support what we're doing. On that note, this is a completely self-funded channel. There's some links below if you'd like to help support us. We have no funding. We're looking for some sponsors and help here, so please do get behind us. Thanks, and check out the chat with Brendan. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay, hello everyone. Back again with Brendan Lee from the BSV project. Brendan, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's all action with you guys at the moment. A lot to talk about. I know how you love talking about number go up, so I thought I got that out of the way yesterday with your man Satoshi. Let's get down to some business. So obviously I've got some guys talking with George. I'm not sure if he's patched yourself in there yet.
Yes, we have some meetings with them coming up, which is
fantastic.
Exciting. So
okay. So, I mean, with that in mind, I think the purpose of this chat is to educate me a little bit more. And, I'm liking what I'm seeing from you guys. So the more I can learn about what's happening at BSV and I know a lot of people in the space and the relevant people will get the relevant information and come and talk to you guys. So on that note, I mean, let's maybe start off with what's staring us in the face right now, and that's obviously the hard forking that's going down 4th February.
Yes.
I want to learn a bit more about what this is all about. It seems to me there's actually a little bit of confusion even within your community about exactly what this all means.
Well, I think the first thing to be clear about is that there's no fork.
Yeah.
So there'll be no diversion of chains or anything like that. There will just be a network upgrade, and immediately after that,
which is actually a type of hard fork. But
well,
get into semantics. There's eight hard forks. I'm an expert on this.
Okay, sure. For the sake of expediency, I'm going to let you have that one.
It's a reverse hard fork. Sounds like something you do after a few drinks on a Friday night, but So basically, you're restoring or removing things that have been added to the original protocol. So I'll sit back now and let you do the talking on that. So take it away.
Look, it's basically a reversion back to the original unbounded Bitcoin protocol. And when Satoshi first released Bitcoin, there were no hard-coded limits in the protocol itself. And unfortunately, sort of even during the end of his tenure as project leader, and then in a much more extreme fashion after he left the project, people sort of took it upon themselves to try and protect this kernel of the Satoshi client and the protocol by basically building walls and locking it down as far as they could, and basically taking all of the utility out of the system. And, when I first got into Bitcoin and started trying to learn a little bit about the scripting language, and I realized it was actually based on a language called Forth. Well, this was a language that I was familiar with. I spent my first job at out of university was programming in Forth for about 3 years. So I started sort of learning Bitcoin script. And then when I actually went to try and do something with it, I discovered that not only were a bunch of sort of the most critical opcodes in that scripting language completely disabled, but that the network itself had implemented a check called isStandard, where basically they would look at every single transaction that came into the network and say, well, does this conform to one of these few very particular templates of transactions that we have decided we will allow on the network? And that was basically pay to public key hash, 2 of 3 multi-sig, and pay to script hash. And basically there was probably a couple of others, but really there were only half a dozen different types of transactions that you could use. And of the, whatever it is, 150 opcodes in that scripting language, you're probably using maybe 1/3 of them in that process. And it was just completely hobbled. There's all these amazing things that you can do with the scripting language if it is allowed to be used. And so one of the things I'm most excited about for the Genesis upgrade is basically the removal of that barrier. So you'll be able to put transactions onto the network that don't conform to any kind of template. And the only restriction will be an economic one. So if you send a transaction to a miner, they'll look at it, or to the network, I should say, the miners will look at it, or their nodes will look at it and basically evaluate how much processing power, how much memory is this going to use, how much fee have you attached to the transaction? Is it cost effective? Is it profitable for us to mine this? And if it is, they'll put it in the next block. And that's really the way it was always intended to be. And that's just one of hundreds of, not hundreds, but certainly several tens of restrictions that are being removed. Can I
throw a question at you just here, just at this point? 'Cause, it surprises me the level of understanding. Even in some of these guys and quite successful fintechs that not quite wrapping their head around what's on offer in the throughout the industry and the various projects. So would you say, I touched on this briefly yesterday in my chat with River and Satoshi, but would you now say that with the removal of this cap, this limit of the block size, who's the nearest competitors now? Because I think this battle is rhetoric with BTC. I just don't see how that's really relevant anymore. Your business models are entirely different. You're two different things. So, I think that conversation's kind of over. But, in business terms, people coming along who have identified that the use of a distributed ledger could be relevant to them. Who would you say your nearest competitors for your offerings within the industry now?
Look, I would definitely say that this is something we're now going up against, existing fintech. And
Right.
so people who are using the legacy money system to build, banking and those sorts of things.
If we just stay within the sort of distributed ledger offerings that are out there at the moment, whether public or permissioned, who, throw a few names at me, who would you say have sort of got, because clearly people, someone's identified, okay, the use of this tech really suits us for a supply chain company, we're in shipping, whatever. I know the sort of companies they're talking to, but for you, who do you sort of feel that you'd have to present a better offering to, so to speak?
To be honest, I would say that probably the most entrenched competition, the most entrenched real competition, because I don't really consider Ethereum real competition. I think there's a lot of people having a bit of a wank over what it does, but nobody's actually building anything serious. Probably the most entrenched competition, the one that's winning the most enterprise dollars at the moment, would be Hyperledger. And, some of those other private blockchain products.
Mm.
But again, from a technical standpoint, excuse me, I don't really believe for a second that they represent proper competition for BSV in the real world. And I think once people start to realize just what is possible on this network, those sorts of systems that they're plowing millions of dollars into building are going to be dropped like a hot potato and looked at as a bad experiment in a technology that nobody really understood properly.
So next question, the level of understanding continues to shock me. So in fairly straightforward basic terms, the people that are looking at these permissioned options out there as opposed to public option of BSV. How are you explaining that? What would be an elevator pitch of comparing those two?
So, yeah, okay, that's a great question. I think the important thing to understand is that the base level of Bitcoin is really an open system, and that means that basically anybody can go and use it. And I mean, unless they get in some kind of trouble with the law and the miners all agree that you're not allowed to spend those coins until a judge says that whatever's going on there, that sort of thing is something that we can also handle on BSV. But for most people, you and I and, Joe on the street, anybody can make transactions on the BSV ledger. Now, the difference between that and something like what you would expect they are building with these permissioned blockchain systems is that anytime you are doing anything more than simply exchanging Bitcoins, so anytime where you are actually embedding other data, building, say, an application layer that sits on top of Bitcoin, you need another layer system on top of that. And that would be basically doing all of the stuff that they're trying to do with Hyperledger, but it does it on top of Bitcoin. And if you go and look at some of the products that are already out there from people like Unrider with his Planaria, Grid Planaria systems, those are already capable of doing all of the same things that Hyperledger does with Fabric, but far cheaper, far more simple, and ready for enterprise adoption. And I don't think it'll be too long before people start to realize that having to manage not just the actual implementation of that application layer protocol, but also the entire blockchain and all of the infrastructure that goes with that. And, when you're managing a private blockchain and you've got stuff in multiple locations, you've got to have secure networking between all of those locations. You're vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. And when you just go straight for an open public ledger where there's already enterprise miners all around the world applying proof of work to secure your actions on that ledger, and you can throw all of that infrastructure away and just focus on building that front end that you need, we're going to see a really rapid transition away from those private permissioned systems, because I think that, you already have a permission layer that sits on top of Bitcoin, and so your permissioned actions basically right around on Bitcoin, in Bitcoin transactions, and you apply the permissions at another layer. So
okay. So one that's a little more fiddly now.
Yep.
The big thing that I really struggled to get my head around for a long time, and still do to a certain degree. We understand consensus. How the fact that we have users, miners, developers. There's built-in security, decentralization, whatever you want to call it. All these attributes that make this type of technology a public ledger. Within BTC, my understanding is there's 5 or 6 people that have admin rights to be the ultimate people that would change the code. So you guys are about to go through Genesis now. So I've met Steve Shadders, fantastic guy. Obviously, he's integral in all of this. But could you just talk through in as simple terms as possible how this actually works? I mean, how do you retain the fact that compared to these permissioned ledgers?
Sure.
Once this protocol is locked, what keeps this a public ledger at its essence? In really, really simple terms.
Sure.
Could you try and talk me through that a bit?
Yeah. So I think the key thing is a word you used about 30 or 40 seconds ago when you were talking about BTC, and you were saying there's only 5 or 6 guys who can change the code, and that's a key word because it's a very, very common mistake that people make, which is that they think the code is the same as the protocol, and it's not. You can have multiple different mining clients written with different languages, written by different people, written to operate in very different environments. But as long as they communicate with the network using the proper protocol and they validate their transactions in the exact same way as all of the other nodes, using the rules established between nodes that say, this is the Bitcoin protocol, the code really becomes unimportant. Right. And what is really precious, and what I think Bitcoin SV it focuses on above all else, and that you don't see in any other project that's out there, is that focus on maintaining that solid protocol. And we say it's a foundation of rock, and that's so important because if you're a fintech builder and you're looking to build an application on top of something like a protocol, and it's constantly changing, this just means that every few months, all of the work that you've done is potentially being completely undone. And so in BSV, we're focused on establishing that protocol, establishing the specification of that protocol, how everything in that protocol works, like right down to the very, very finest detail, and locking that in stone. Mm-hmm. And then it will be up to the miners, and these are enterprise players, people who are competing for potentially in a few years' time, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars per week or per month, competing for the right to build that ledger, to continuously extend that ledger every 10 minutes, to provide the infrastructure that we all use when we write to that ledger. And beyond a certain point, it won't matter who writes the code or what language it's in or anything like that, because all miners will be in rock solid agreement that this is the way we talk to each other, this is the way we build the ledger. And that's what the protocol is really about. And I think it won't be too, and I suspect we're already starting to see it emerge, that the miners who are really at the forefront of the network and the ones who are moving the fastest, making the most gains in sort of lowering the cost of transactions and being ready to do things in different ways to other miners are the ones who are making the most active customizations to that node client. And I suspect it won't be too long before we actually start to see miners who are building their own and actually not using that BSV node client that anybody can go and download, but actually doing it privately themselves. And at that point, it really doesn't matter whether you can see the code or not, because you can see the output of the code on the ledger, and all of the other miners can look at what that miner is putting forward as a potential block and say, well, actually, you've misevaluated this transaction and this is not how it's invalid. You've made a mistake in your code, boy. Sorry, mate, your block is orphaned. And so they'll have to learn to be very careful about how they do these things, because it will cost them a lot of money very quickly if they do it wrong. So yeah, the key thing is not to think about this as a code project, but as an infrastructure project, and where that infrastructure is built to allow anybody in the world to
protocol was probably the word I was meaning to use rather than code.
Sure. Yeah, to transact openly using that protocol, and then to make sure that that protocol never changes.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
And that's very important, like, because if you're building a platform that's going to last 20 years, you don't want the protocol to change in such a way that all of a sudden your transactions are no longer valid. And we've already had that a couple of times. So there are transactions that could have been written on BTC that are no longer valid on BSV because we've got changes inside the signature hashing function, which are being reverted as part of the Genesis.
I mean, can you tell us a bit about the size of the team that's working on something like Genesis? And who are they and where are they? How does that all work?
I guess it is public, so I can say a little bit. I mean, I'm on very much on the periphery of it all, so I get exposed to little bits at a time. But I know there's quite a large team in Slovenia, and I think possibly, certainly well over 50 people, maybe approaching 100. And there's also a very large team in London, and those are all, I believe, N-Chain people now. There were some acquisitions that have happened in that process of building that team. But, everybody that I've met who works on the project is, in my mind, quite exceptional in their understanding of how this all works and what is very important about this project and what is key to preserve, and also understanding that the level of care that needs to be taken as we go through and unpick this kind of decade-long mismanagement of the code base. And I look at the number of changes, the number of things that they're removing, the number of limits, and I can only imagine how many late nights and hours of writing code, checking code, testing has been done to get to this point in what I feel is a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. I think you explained that fairly well. So this is all happening on the 4th of February.
That's right.
Is it a sleepless night type scenario for these guys? Are there things that can go horribly wrong?
Absolutely. It will be. They will be sitting in their office, monitoring the network and looking at what's happening. I know my friend Esson, who manages the Satoshi Shotgun, is over in London at the moment, and he will probably be pointing that at the mainnet and executing some kind of transaction load that will ensure that the fork is locked in. So basically what that means is that he will process a whole bunch of transactions that would be invalid under pre-Genesis rules immediately after the fork happens, so that the next block or one of the next 5 blocks or so includes transactions that would have been considered invalid. And to demonstrate that the network is now operating on the new rules, and that anybody who builds on that block or any subsequent block has accepted that those new rules are in play. So,
okay, excellent. So the other thing, obviously, that I really want to sort of go into a bit more detail with you over is tokenized, the BSV's ability to effectively have smart contract functionality. Maybe that's a separate chat, because I possibly don't feel prepared enough right now. You've put out a good presentation the other day, which I've just started to look at. So where can people see that? Actually, I can stick a link to.
So they can go to our website firecorp.com, and if they click through, there's a link to some what we call insights, which is our blog.
Yep.
And the last, I think, 3 blog posts running are stepping through that whole process. But you can also jump into the tokenized Telegram, which is, there's a link to that on the tokenized website, which is just tokenized.com.
Yep.
And in that Telegram is a PDF of the original version of that, and which is a reasonable amount different from what's up on the web, but is basically carries all of the important relevant information, and that goes through all of the things also that we will cover in the blog posts over the next 2 weeks.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few people tap me recently asking fairly technical questions. Mitch being one of them, who you're now talking to. So it's not nice to have George in the same town and sort of hand these people over. So look, I'll stick some links below this video, and maybe in our next chat we can sort of get into some detail around that functionality and what you really have on offer for as solutions for a lot of people out there at the moment that are tapping me that are concerned about the chains that they're currently operating on, whether they're going to be around, et cetera.
I can understand that concern.
Yeah, that's I'm quite shocked how.
And it's one thing I would like to get out there now, even before we do have our chat about tokenized, is that tokenized is not the only application layer protocol that can manage tokens that is available to people on BSV. And this is what we mean by
but they're the only ones giving me an 80% commission.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
I'm joking.
Actually, they are. They're the only ones. Ignore what
industry.
I just said. No, there's a lot of other really interesting and fantastic
Any links you want me to post, man, just send them through, and I'll stick them under this video. Share the love. You're that guy. It comes back to you sharing my video once again.
What I'll get is someone's actually assembled a really great infographic, and it basically covers almost every single project that is alive and being worked on in BSV at the moment. And I think the number's now well over 150 separate projects. And obviously they're not all token protocols. That includes things like WeatherSV, Preve, all kinds of different things that do different and amazing and wonderful things. Yeah. And one thing that I do know is that there are a lot of projects that are being developed in stealth mode that are waiting for Genesis, because they need those features of the protocol that until now have been basically locked in a safe, key thrown away, completely unavailable, which will, with Genesis, basically be completely opened up. And I actually don't even know what any of them are, but the buzz in kind of that group in the middle of the network there is that there is some pretty amazing stuff that's going to come out in the few weeks after Genesis. Yep. And I'm super excited. So it should get really
I mean, anything else? Last time we spoke, you suggested a couple of use cases for me to check out. Twitch. So I've arranged a call with the CEO, a guy called Josh. We're doing that next week. Looking forward to that. So had to play around with that. I can definitely see a future for it. The other one was Stramanity. I think I commented on that yesterday, so I won't go over it again. Brendan, I'm going to love you and leave you today. And,
no worries, Sean. Thanks for the chat.
We'll pick this up next week. Send me through the links you want me to post. And
I'll do that.
Look forward to speaking to you next week. Enjoy your weekend.
Likewise, you too, mate.
Cheers,
Enjoy.
mate.